The date is late autumn, 2025. Somewhere inside the private wing of Adelaide Cottage, a lamp is still burning at 2:47 in the morning. And the Prince and Princess of Wales are not asleep. They are packing. Not the way royals pack for a state visit. Not the choreographed suitcases handled by aides in white gloves. This is different. This is quiet. This is fast. This is the kind of packing you do when something has gone wrong inside the walls that were supposed to protect you. What if I told you that the very estate William and Catherine chose as their sanctuary, the place they moved to in order to escape the suffocating machinery of the monarchy, had turned into the one place they no longer felt safe? What if I told you that what they found in the weeks leading up to that quiet, unannounced departure from Windsor didn't just shake them personally, but sent a tremor through every senior member of the royal family, from Clarence House to Buckingham Palace itself? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what William and Catherine discovered inside Windsor, why they fled in the dead of night, and what it means for the future of a monarchy already stretched to its emotional and institutional breaking point. Before we go any further, hit subscribe, because this story pulls back a curtain the palace desperately wants closed. Stay with this, because what begins as a quiet security concern becomes something far more personal, far more human, and far more damning. To understand why William and Catherine fled Windsor, you have to understand why they chose it in the first place. Rewind to the summer of 2022. Queen Elizabeth II was still on the throne, but only just. The family knew the end was coming. And William, who had spent his entire life watching what royal life did to the people he loved most, his mother, his father, his grandmother, made a decision. He would not raise his 3 children inside the gilded cage of Kensington Palace. He would not let George, Charlotte, and Louis grow up beneath the same chandeliers that had witnessed his own childhood unravel. So he chose Adelaide Cottage. 4 bedrooms, modest by royal standards, tucked inside the Windsor estate, walking distance from the Queen at the time. Near the school the children would attend. It was, as one insider put it, the closest thing to a normal family home a future king could ever hope for. Catherine loved it. She loved the garden. She loved the quiet. She loved that her children could ride bicycles without cameras. She loved that when she cooked pasta on a Sunday evening, no footman appeared to serve it. Adelaide Cottage was theirs. It was small. It was warm. It was safe. Or so they thought. Because here's the thing about Windsor. Windsor is not one house. Windsor is a fortress of over 5,000 acres, containing the castle, the Great Park, Frogmore, Royal Lodge, dozens of grace and favor properties, and a labyrinth of tunnels, staff quarters, and administrative offices that stretch back nearly 1,000 years. Adelaide Cottage sits in the middle of it. And the family that surrounds it, the extended royal family, the courtiers, the security teams, the staff, the outer ring of relatives clinging to their apartments. That family is not always united. That family, sources say, has been quietly at war with itself for years. And in the autumn of 2025, according to those monitoring the internal dynamics of the Wales household, that quiet war finally broke through the walls of Adelaide Cottage. It began, insiders say, with a series of small things. The kind of small things you dismiss until you cannot dismiss them anymore. A door found unlocked that should have been locked. A member of staff reassigned without explanation. A conversation held in what was believed to be a private room that somehow found its way back to Catherine through a third party. A journalist calling for comment on a matter only 3 people inside the house should have known about. Catherine, who has spent her entire adult life mastering the art of composure, began to notice a pattern. And Catherine, as anyone who has watched her closely knows, notices everything. She told William. William at first dismissed it. He had spent decades being told the palace leaks. He had grown up with it. He had watched it destroy his mother. He had made peace, or tried to, with the fact that no room in a royal residence is ever truly private. But then came October. According to sources close to the household, in mid-October of 2025, a package arrived at Adelaide Cottage. It was addressed to the Princess of Wales. It had cleared standard security screening. It appeared, on the surface, to be ordinary correspondence. It was not. What was inside that package has not been publicly detailed. But two things are known. The first is that Catherine did not open it herself. A member of her private staff did. The second is that within hours of it being opened, the Metropolitan Police's Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit had been notified, and a formal internal review was launched. Think about that for a moment. Because the significance is not just that something concerning arrived at their door. The significance is that it made it through the layers. It made it past the outer perimeter. It made it past the screening. It made it into the hands of someone Catherine trusted. And somewhere along that chain, a system that has protected the British monarchy for centuries had, for a brief and terrifying moment, failed. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Because the package itself, as unsettling as it was not what ultimately drove William and Catherine out of Windsor. It was what the investigation uncovered afterward. When the security review began, protection officers did what they always do in these situations. They traced backward. They looked at who had access. They looked at movement logs. They looked at staff rotations. They looked at communications. They looked at every hand that touched every parcel, every letter, every delivery that had crossed the threshold of Adelaide Cottage for the previous 6 months. And what they found, according to sources close to that review, was not a stranger, not an outsider, not a lone figure with a grudge from beyond the gates. What they found was something much closer to home. Ask yourself something. If you have spent years building a fortress around your family, and one day you discover that the crack in the wall is not on the outside but on the inside, where do you go? Who do you trust? What do you do when the danger is wearing a uniform you recognize? That, according to those familiar with the couple's thinking, is the question William and Catherine spent late October and early November wrestling with. The Wales family did not immediately leave. They stayed for weeks, quietly, while the review deepened. Catherine continued her scheduled engagements. William continued his. The children went to school. On the surface, everything looked perfectly normal. That is the thing about the modern monarchy, the surface is always perfectly normal. But behind that surface, staff who have worked at Windsor for decades say they had never seen the atmosphere so tense. Meetings were held in unusual rooms. Certain aides were quietly excluded from conversations they had been part of for years. William, who has always been protective of his wife, was described by one long-serving member of staff as watching everyone like a man who had suddenly realized he could no longer tell friend from foe. And then came the second incident. If you've made it this far, hit like, because what you're about to hear is the part of this story the palace would most like to keep buried. In early November, according to reports that have quietly circulated among those who monitor royal household affairs, a second breach was discovered. This one was not a package. This one was digital. A device inside the Wales household, a device that should have been secured behind multiple layers of the most sophisticated cyber protection in the British state, had been accessed remotely. Briefly, just once, but it had been accessed. And what was on that device, according to those familiar with the matter, was not state business. It was not government correspondence. It was not sensitive royal briefings. It was something far more painful. It was private. It was personal. It was family. Sources describe photographs, voice notes, messages between William and Catherine that were never meant for any other eyes. The kind of content every couple exchanges. The kind of content that belongs to a marriage, not a monarchy. The moment William was told, according to one account, he did not shout. He did not throw anything. He did what those who know him best say he always does when he is truly furious. He went silent. He walked out of the room. And he did not speak for nearly an hour. Catherine, when she learned, is said to have simply asked one question. Who? And that question, sources say, is the question the palace has still not fully answered. Because here is the terrible truth that emerged from that investigation. The breach did not come from a hacker in a distant country. It did not come from a hostile foreign intelligence service. It came from someone who had legitimate credentials to be inside the Windsor estate. Someone whose name was on a list. Someone who was supposed to be trusted. And that discovery, more than anything else, is what finally drove William and Catherine to leave. They did not announce it. They did not brief the press. They did not issue a statement. They simply, quietly, in the middle of a Tuesday night, packed enough for the children and left. The next morning, staff at Adelaide Cottage arrived to find the family gone. Not on holiday, not on a working visit. Gone, and no one, according to those who were there, was willing to say where. For nearly 72 hours, the whereabouts of the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 children were known to fewer than a dozen people in the entire British establishment. Think about what that means. In an era of constant surveillance, in a country where every royal movement is logged, photographed, and cross-referenced, the future King of England and his family effectively disappeared. Not because they were hiding from the public, but because they were hiding from something inside their own house. When the news finally began to trickle out, first through whispers, then through carefully placed briefings, then through the more determined corners of the royal press, the palace machinery did what it always does. It contained. It softened. It reframed. The story became one of a planned move, a period of reflection, a family transition. The word fled was nowhere to be found in any official communication. But those who understand how the monarchy actually works read between those lines. And what they read was alarming. Because the Prince and Princess of Wales do not flee. They do not run. They are the steady center of the modern royal family, the couple upon whom the entire future of the institution has been quietly staked. If they were rattled enough to leave Windsor in the middle of the night, then something inside that estate had crossed a line the palace had never before had to face. And that brings us to the king. Charles, sources say, was informed within hours of the second breach. His reaction, according to those familiar with the conversation, was described in one word: devastated. Not angry, not defensive. Devastated, because Charles, more than perhaps anyone in that family, understands what it feels like to have your privacy violated by the people closest to you. He lived through the tapes. He lived through the leaks of the 90s. He lived through the humiliation of hearing his own voice played back to a nation that would never let him forget it. And now, decades later, the same shadow was falling across his son. The conversation between father and son, according to those with knowledge of it, lasted more than 2 hours. It was not, sources emphasize, a warm conversation. William, who has never been fully able to forgive certain figures inside his father's inner circle, made his position clear. He wanted names. He wanted accountability. He wanted the machinery of the palace to answer. For once, to the family, it was supposed to serve, not the other way around. Charles, sources say, agreed. In principle. But Charles is also a king, and a king does not always have the freedom to act as a father. That tension, that ancient tension between the crown and the family that wears it, has defined every generation of the Windsors. And in that room, on that autumn day, it defined this one too. Meanwhile, across the estate, another figure was watching all of this unfold, with her own quiet calculations. Camilla, because here's the part nobody expected. Sources monitoring the internal dynamics of the family say that in the aftermath of the Windsor breach, the Queen made an unusual number of private phone calls. To whom, exactly, remains unclear, but the pattern of those calls, according to those tracking her schedule, coincided closely with a series of subtle personnel changes that began quietly reshuffling the household staff at both Windsor and Clarence House in the weeks that followed. Whether those changes were connected to the breach, or whether they were simply the palace doing what the palace always does when embarrassed, closing ranks, moving pieces, tidying the story, no one outside the innermost circle can say for certain. But Catherine, sources insist, noticed, and Catherine, as we've established, notices everything. The Wales family eventually surfaced. They were seen, briefly, in Norfolk. Then at Anmer Hall, the country home they have kept as a private retreat for over a decade. Anmer Hall sits on the Sandringham estate. It is quieter than Windsor. It is more remote. It is, crucially, harder to reach without being seen. And it is, according to those close to the couple, where William and Catherine spent the following weeks trying to rebuild something that had been broken. Not their marriage. Their marriage, by every account, has emerged from these years of trials as one of the strongest in the modern royal family. What was broken was something else: their trust. Their sense that the walls of their home were their own. Their belief that inside the machinery of the monarchy there was still a room where they could simply be William and Kate. That belief, sources say, is what they were mourning at Anmer. Ask yourself something. What does it mean, in a family whose entire identity is built on continuity, on tradition, on the seamless passage of duty from one generation to the next? What does it mean when the heir to the throne no longer feels safe inside the walls his grandmother lived in? What does it mean for a monarchy when the couple upon whom its future depends has to run from it in order to protect their children? Those are not questions with easy answers. And those are not questions the palace is eager to have asked in public. But they are being asked. Quietly, in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, in the offices of Clarence House, in the meeting rooms where the men in grey gather to plan the next 50 years of a 1,000-year-old institution, they are asking whether the machine has grown too large, whether the number of people with access has grown too great, whether the old assumption that everyone inside the palace is loyal to the family has finally, quietly, died. Because the truth, according to those who have spent decades observing this world, is that the modern royal household is no longer the tight, silent, uniformly loyal institution it once pretended to be. It is a sprawling web of contractors, aides, advisors, external consultants, communications professionals, security personnel, and staff on rotating contracts. Every one of them signs an agreement. Every one of them takes an oath. But every one of them is also, at the end of the day, a human being with a phone, a mortgage, and a life beyond the palace walls. And in that reality, the old fortress model no longer works. That, more than any single package or any single breach, is the deeper meaning of what William and Catherine discovered at Windsor. They did not just discover a leak. They discovered the ceiling. They discovered the limit of what the old ways can protect. And they discovered that if they wanted to raise their children as human beings, they were going to have to build something new, something smaller, something quieter, something the machine could not so easily penetrate. Whether they can do that inside the framework of the monarchy remains, according to those watching them, the great unanswered question of the next decade. Because William is not Harry. William will not leave. William will not walk away. William has spent his entire life preparing for a duty he did not choose, and he will carry that duty until the day it passes to his son. But the William who will one day become king is not the William his grandmother imagined. He is quieter. He is warrior. He is, in the private assessment of those who know him best, a man who has learned that the institution he is inheriting is not always his friend. And Catherine, standing beside him, is not the wide-eyed young woman who walked into Westminster Abbey in 2011. She is a woman who has faced her own body's betrayal in the form of cancer, faced the public's unrelenting hunger for her image, faced the loss of her privacy in ways no ordinary person can fully imagine, and now faced the discovery that the walls of her own home were never as solid as she believed. She has, by every account, emerged from all of it with a steel that surprises even those closest to her. One senior figure describing her in the weeks after the family's departure from Windsor said simply, "She has changed. She is not harder. She is clearer. She knows exactly who she is now and exactly who she is not going to allow near her children again." Think about that for a moment. Because in that one sentence lies the entire future of the House of Windsor. The children. Because everything William and Catherine have done the choice of Adelaide Cottage. The small staff, the private schooling, the guarded holidays, the middle-of-the-night departure, everything has been in service of one goal: protecting George, Charlotte, and Louis from the fate that consumed Diana. And that consumed, in a different way, Harry. They have watched what the machinery does to children raised inside it. They have seen the cost. And they have decided, sources insist, that they will not pay it a third time. Whatever comes next for the Prince and Princess of Wales, that is the compass by which they are navigating. Not tradition, not protocol, not the expectations of the men in gray. Their children. Full stop. And the palace, for perhaps the first time in its modern history, is being forced to reorganize itself around that priority rather than the other way around. That is a quiet revolution. It will not be announced. It will not be televised. It will not be commemorated with a stamp or a coin. But it is happening. Slowly, room by room, decision by decision. Inside the walls of a monarchy that is learning painfully that its own survival now depends on listening to the couple it once assumed would simply obey. If you've made it this far, hit like, because stories like this don't stay buried for long, and the more of us who watch them closely, the harder it becomes for the palace to quietly rewrite them. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because there's one more person we haven't talked about yet. Someone whose name has quietly appeared, again and again, in the margins of this investigation. Someone whose presence at Windsor in the weeks before the Wales family's departure has raised questions no one is yet willing to answer publicly. We will get to that story. Soon. For now, picture it. A cottage on the edge of a great estate. A lamp burning at 2:47 in the morning. A mother folding a small jumper into a bag. A father standing at the window, looking out at the trees he grew up beneath, wondering how many of the eyes in that darkness he can still trust. And a family, quietly, choosing each other over the crown. That is the moment. That is what William and Catherine found at Windsor. Not a stranger at the gate, but the realization that the gate had never really been closed at all. And once you have seen that, you cannot unsee it. Not ever.